Hello and most welcome. Today we will talk on astrology and spirituality. Our guest today is Indra. Indrarinzler is a lifetime spiritual seeker. He's a healer, teacher, and offers life reading for clients. Astrology and the Enneagram of personality are the main modalities that he shares. He has been studying astrology and spirituality for the 50 years. He first learned of the Enneagram of personality in 1999. He uses these two modalities individually and in combination. His focus is to help clients to wake up to who they really are. He works to help people to live beyond their conditioned stories. Let's welcome Indra to the show. Indra, welcome and tell us how are you doing today?
Welcome. Thank you for having me. I'm doing really good. I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to be anywhere, actually, now that think of it. And
Thank you very much.
yeah.
How's it going in India?
India is going really well. I'm wintering in India again. I've been coming for 25 years. This is my first time since COVID. I've been here almost 2 months now, and India is new every day. And India is changing, it's modernizing, but there's still a tremendous amount of magic. There's a lot of people that don't like to come back because it changes, but I find it to be still magical and really serves me as a place to be for the winter.
Amazing. And let me ask you a personal question. What made you go to India? Like, what's the attraction there for you?
Well, I think that, I mean, I've always been interested in India. I've had an Indian guru for 50 years. And so the India was always, I lived in an ashram for 20 years that was
Oh,
dedicated to an Indian teacher. So, I mean, India has always been part of it. Interestingly, astrologically, I was born in New York, and India is 180 degrees apart, or
yes.
180 degrees from New York. And so my seventh house sun becomes a first house sun in India based on relocation chart. And you don't have to understand what I'm saying, but the
Yes.
point is, is that it makes me alive in a way that being in New York didn't. And I left New York as soon as I could. And so it makes sense. And of course, then India is India. And I've been coming for a long time. The attraction, there was always an attraction. And it was always, at first, it was a remembrance that
Mm.
it didn't feel like a new experience. It felt more like a remembrance that back when I first came in 1986.
Mm.
And but I came 19 out of 20 years, and then I broke for COVID, and now I'm back. My wife wanted to go off with her motorhome for the winter in California. She can't come to India because of her health. And I'm left with what do I want to do? And so just came back here for this time, and it feels like an incredible gift every day. Just it's easy. I mean, it's hard in some ways, and in other ways, it's just so easy and natural.
Yeah, that was amazing. Before I had interview with you, I read about your publications and your videos and podcast. You are doing an amazing job, and I really appreciate and I really love your work. And I know what you mean about locational astrology because I saw what you were explaining about locational astrology. So,
Okay.
what is your personal spiritual healing journey and how you were led to study and share astrology and Enneagram of personality?
Well, so that's three questions. My
Yeah.
spiritual healing journey was surrendering.
Ah,
I mean, surrendering and then surrendering more and then surrendering more and surrendering more. It was just opening up. It was getting rid of the ego, not getting rid of
yeah.
the ego, but putting the ego in a more place where there wasn't suffering and there wasn't pain and there was letting go of arrogance and step by step. I say you don't need to know the last step, you only need to know the first step. So step by step, my heart opened to teachings that were in the early 1970s that were nothing like I had grown up with or knew, but it seemed like something to follow. And then each year I became more uh, comfortable
Mm,
and more committed, and eventually lived in an ashram dedicated to my teacher for 20 years. And then it was time to leave. And then the searching really took off as I started traveling the world and visiting other cultures and reading other teachers and sitting with other teachers. And astrology was always at the beginning. I think that the gurus led me to astrology. I was mathematical as a child, and so the astrology, which has a lot of mathematics in it and geometry in it. I mean, astrology is geometry. I mean, in a sense. Um, and so it was a natural path. And then when I found the Enneagram, that also seemed natural. In the first weekend, I remember sitting there and thinking that the Enneagram reminded me of astrology. And then I found a teacher who taught me how Enneagram and astrology work together so that I can see people's Enneagram chart. I can see people's Enneagram story in their astrology charts. And uh, I don't know anybody else in the world that does what I do. My teacher taught me. He does it. I don't know if he's still here because we haven't
mm,
connected in a while. He's a hermit, a long
mm,
time. But I have points of view and things that I share that are me and that I vibrate with. And I've learned after so many years to that I don't really care that people understand it or don't understand it or like it or don't like it.
yeah.
The traditional ways just don't interest me. I find them to be, and when I say traditional, I'm talking ways, I'm talking about astrology and Enneagram for that matter, that how shall I say it, that the things that I'm interested in, which is the spiritual growth,
Yeah.
is not the focus of most of the people doing astrology and Enneagram for that matter either. They may want some personal growth, but that deep spiritual growth is not really there. It's more psychological oriented, and astrology is very rule oriented. And I learned all the rules of both. And then I basically let them all go. And my approach has been to feel the energy of the modalities rather than be stuck in the rules of the modalities. And I suppose
Mm,
that's the way I've lived my own life. I've had the opportunity to live my own life that way. And I don't say that in an arrogant way. It's not about the arrogance, but it's about following the heart.
okay. Indra, some of the people throughout my life, I've seen that they are hesitant or they have questions about the history of astrology. And tell us why people should believe in astrology. Just a little bit about the history and the importance of it.
Okay, so well, people can choose not to
Yeah,
believe in
yeah,
astrology if they like, but that doesn't affect astrology.
yeah, that's
You
true.
know, it doesn't really, astrology doesn't care whether you believe in it or not. It's going to
Yeah,
happen, whether
yeah,
you believe in it or not. I think that why? Why should you believe in astrology? I can't say why, you know. I mean, you got to believe in something, I suppose.
Yeah,
And I think that in order to believe in astrology, you have to give up uh, some of your own arrogance, some of your
yeah,
own idea that you're in control. And being believing in astrology doesn't mean that you are adrift at sea, that the planets will overtake you.
yeah,
I think it's just realizing that there are powers which are true for everybody, whether they believe it or not, that there are powers outside ourselves that have influence over us. And
yes,
I don't think that I think that the idea that you're stuck in life, that because
mhm,
of a planetary position and you're stuck, I don't believe that either. If that's the astrology you're talking about, well, we're in agreement.
yeah,
But if you're talking about the kind of astrology that outside forces have an influence on us,
mhm,
that's the kind of astrology that I share and teach, and that is the way that I live my life. And um, people can choose to ignore that if they like, but I
yeah,
think at some point there will be an awakening, and
yes,
and that's okay if there isn't.
yeah. About the modalities, I've seen you use a few modalities. So can you tell us like how many modalities are there that you use to read people, and which one do you like to use?
Well, I like to use them all, but I like the Enneagram because it gives us our core triggers. The Enneagram is about 60 years old. There are 9 personality types. Enneagram means nine-sided figure. There are 9 personality types, and when we know our core story, it really helps us to know our core triggers and helps us to get into the moment. And I find that it has a way. I like to think that astrology is the track coach, that it's looking at
Okay.
elbows and knees.
Mm,
It's like, it's trying to speed up your 100-meter dash time, and it's all elbows and knees. It's very specific. Your planet is this, your planet is that. This is this, this is that, that's in this is that. And Enneagram is the fan watching the race from the stands. It has a larger viewpoint, and that larger viewpoint I find very, very important, because if I'm doing an astrology chart with someone, I find that if I can bring in the Enneagram and I can see that their personality story is as such, then I can frame the astrology in a more relevant and deeper way for them. So I really like the Enneagram. I like the astrology because it shows our strengths and weaknesses. It's like an X-ray, and it's like the doctor says you've got stomach digestion problems.
mm,
That's the Enneagram. And then
yeah.
the X-ray, or like the doctor says you've got a broken bone, and then the X-ray is astrology, and it says, see here, this is what it looks like. You see how they're split apart, and we've got to heal, and we put the pin in, and it goes here. It's a very complementary modality that to the Enneagram, and I'm really surprised 25 years into Enneagram and astrology together, that people are really content to be blind to something else which would illuminate them and light them up, meaning
Mm,
using them together. The astrology people aren't interested in Enneagram. The Enneagram people aren't interested in astrology, but the two of them together enable them to do their own modality
mm,
like 50% deeper. And people say, well,
yeah.
no, I don't want it. And
Mm,
I don't understand that. So another modality that I use I call the wheel of totality. I believe that it was given to me by spirit, and
mm.
that I didn't really come to it on my own, that it was a bit of a setup. And it
Wow.
shows the empty houses that nobody talks about in astrology. Every reading is about the houses that you have planets in, but nobody talks about the empty houses. If they do, they say, look to the ruler at the other side of the chart. And I say, if you're going to have an operation, do you want the doctor on Skype or do you want him there? That the
Yeah.
fact is there's no energy in that house. Doesn't
Yeah.
matter what the ruler is.
Yeah.
So if your toilet backs up and your landlord is out of town, it's not going to do you much good if you can't
Yeah.
get a hold of them. So my point being that this modality teaches us about the blind spots. It's the energy. Every house has awareness.
Mm.
And if we don't have a planet there, that awareness is a blind spot. And we don't start working on these blind spots until we're 50. And why is that? Because in 20s and 30s, you're not interested in your deficiencies. You're
Yes.
building up your ego, you're building up your identity, and it's only later in life that or midlife that everything that you've tried and some of it has worked and some of it hasn't worked, but there becomes in 40s there becomes a bit of more openness to try things that you wouldn't normally try,
Mm.
and to look at your deficiencies because you've had X number of bad relationships or X number of jobs that haven't worked out and you're not happy where you're living, and so you begin being more inquisitive, and in that inquiry is the aspect of openness, and in that openness then you're looking at your deficiencies. So the wheel of totality shows the blind spots, it shows what you're not very good at, and it's an incredibly deep reading. It's very intense, even though it's a short reading, and because it's really hard for people to see the things they don't get. It's
Yeah.
so easy when I explain to them what they have, and they say, "Oh, yeah, sure, I understand." And then I say, "This is what you don't have." And they go, "I don't understand that. I don't understand the concept of it." And I
Mm.
say, "Well, you don't have a planet there, you know, it's really hard to understand." And so, depending on age and depending on openness and depending on interest, the reading is
Mm.
incredibly insightful and interesting. So I use that modality. I use location astrology, which we mentioned here a little bit. Location astrology, the power of place, the
Mm-hmm.
idea that where we are on the earth has an effect for us. This is not the ley lines that is the power of the earth itself,
Mm.
but it is laying lines on the earth based on your own particular chart. That
That.
we cast a chart and then we have software that puts the lines on, and the lines are helpful to know. They're neither good nor bad, but there are places, are difficult planets being on the line where a planetary line is strong. For the planets that are not strong in our chart can be very triggering.
Mm.
Being in places where there are no lines can be a little bit like a breather. It can be like living at the top of a mountain in the sense
Yeah.
that the career may not take off or the relationships may not take off because there's not a lot of energy there,
Yeah.
but it is the opportunity to feel the quiet, and particularly if you have a very busy mind, to go to a place where there are no lines can be very helpful to people because because it's quieter, because it's it's like sleeping, not exactly like sleeping, but it's like sleeping in that you get a break. And for
Mm-hmm.
some people at certain times in their life, that's really good. I remember saying to a client who was living actually near where I live in California, and there weren't good lines there. She was like a middle-aged 50s, I remember, lady, I think, and I remember, and she was going to move to her daughter in South Carolina where there were no lines. And I said, that's great. I mean, I say, in this place where it's so tense and that you're not happy, you can't figure out what you want to do.
Mm.
I say, go to visit your daughter where she'll take care of you. There's no energy there. I mean, there's no lines there, so there's less energy. And then there you can kind of figure out what you want to do, but you can't,
Mhm.
in the middle of a storm, you can't figure out your next step.
Yes.
And I mean, maybe some people can, but most people can't, especially when you're triggered and emotional. It's really
Yeah.
hard. So you go to a place where there's no energy. No, there's not no energy, but there are no lines. And there she can kind of get to a quiet place in order to find her own strength and uh,
Mhm.
and figure out her own. And so the problem is that wherever we go, we take our own baggage. So in the
Yeah.
location readings, I spend a lot of time on people's astrology charts. And so for so many people, for some of the people, I do recommend the life reading of the three modalities that I
Mm.
just talked about in order to really get a placement on who you are. Because it is, people think that the location is Shangri-La, it's the perfect place. Show me where my relationship line is. I'm going to meet Prince or Princess Charming, and my life is going to be done. And that's not the way that it works. And so uh, so I go through their chart with them in order to help them to understand, and then we look at the location to see the combination of their climates that they like and the countries that work for them, and they get an understanding of the places that they've been and the places that they're going to, and so that's become a really popular modality. I'm offering a lot of readings to clients that way with that modality as a focus.
Amazing. And what are these lines? A little bit, because the lines or these
So
energies. Yeah.
yeah, the lines are the 0 degrees of the first, fourth, seventh, and 10th house, said to be the most powerful places in their chart.
Yeah. And why it's
And
different for each person? Like how it is
it's
different.
different for
Yeah.
yeah, it's different for each. It's based on, well, the teaching is the same, but
Yeah.
the actual placement has to do with your particular chart.
Mm.
Like I say, the ley lines that are in the earth, like the power sources, they're the same for everybody. I mean, you may not feel it the same, but they're in the earth. But
Yeah.
these are your particular lines that are laid on the line. And the first house line deals with yourself, and the seventh house line deals with your relationships, and the 10th house line is focused on your career, and the fourth house line is about your grounding. And so depending on what you want to work on, different places are you go to those different lines, they have different effects. Just like what you eat for breakfast isn't what like you eat for dinner. I mean,
Mm.
generally.
Mm. And you also talked about some other modalities like Vedic astrology. What are these modalities like Vedic astrology?
Well, I
What's
mentioned the
like?
Vedic astrology. That's the strengths and weaknesses of your chart. But I do another modality with astrology is the Navamsha chart. It's the chart
Mm.
of who you become. It's called the D9 divisional chart. It's called the spouse chart. It's not the spouse. I don't use it as the spouse you marry. Everybody uses it as the spouse you marry. I use it as the perfect spouse. It's you at your highest. And so
Mm.
it's who you become around 60. People recognize it in their 40s. They recognize it as their dream. It's like who they want to become is in the chart. I mean,
Mm.
some of who they want to become is in the chart. And if you're younger, the chart can be helpful because it helps you to know like which fork in the road you want to take. But the reading is geared more for older people, but I mean any age is helpful. But because it's who they become. And so you actually progress if you do good at this life, then you progress over your chart. And what does that mean is that, let's say that you've got a weak sun, and so you have insecurity about yourself or low self-esteem. And so in your 20s and 30s, those are big issues. But as you get into your 50s and 60s, those issues aren't so important anymore. And you learn while you're while you may always be a little challenged with esteem, you learn to love yourself as you are. You learn that you have skills and abilities. You learn that to recognize that maybe you're a slower learner, or that you feel when you have egotistical people around you, it makes you feel smaller, and you learn to adapt to that. You're not around those people. You learn to not listen to them, whatever it is. You grow up, and in growing up, you take on your Navamsha chart, and
Okay,
so
that's amazing.
that is a very helpful tool. I don't do so many of those, but at the shows, at the fairs that I do them more often. But those is an incredible tool, and very
Yeah.
happy to be able to share that.
Thank you very much. And I have another question, like about the Enneagram of personality, how it help people in their personal growth.
Well, the Enneagram, how it helps for personal growth is that you understand your personality stories, that in the
Mhm.
personality stories, when you're engaged in them, it's just reflective and you just act certain ways. But the idea here is that it helps you to slow us down, because we start understanding the patterning of it, that of our
Mm,
personality, that there's a pattern of it. And that's why people say, how does this know me so well? I
yeah.
take them through a bunch of Enneagram, and they say, this is amazing. How does it know me so well? Well, it knows you so well because the personality has patterns. And that, I say, I didn't write this book now. I'm taking you, this is a 1995 book, so it's like almost 30 years old, and the patternings are so strong. But I think that how I want to answer your question, that's about the Enneagram of personality in particular. But I think what your question is really dealing with is the something that I call the four doorways to conscious living. And I like to say I like to say that at the end of the reading, people used to say, "This is great information, Indra. Now what do I do with it?" And so I've been given this four doorways to conscious living. And so the first doorway is that we need to learn to observe. We need to learn to watch our thinking and our behavior. We need to learn to watch our reaction to other people's thinking and behavior. We need to get out of the movie of our life into the audience to
Mm,
watch our movie, watch our life from a dispassionate point of view, from an objectivity point of view. We need to not get so involved and triggered and emotional by the things that happen in our life. We need to get like our mom or dad may have said, you need to slow down, take a time out in your room,
mm,
think about what you just did, like we're 6 years old. Well, we still need to do that at 60 years old. We need to be able to observe our behavior from a dispassionate place in order to be able to let go of the stories that we're and the behaviors that we're holding on to. And in order to, what the Enneagram will do will help us to see the motivation behind our behavior. When we can understand the motivation behind our behavior, then it's really easy. It's much easier to let go of the behavior, that we
mm,
see it in a more objective and a more a way to be able to realize that um, we're not a young kid anymore. I was working with a client in her late 60s this week who's has had, for logical reasons, is still reacting to childhood stories. And I had a client a couple of weeks ago that told me a story about her life, something that happened at 9. And I think I might have said something like, "Wow, it's still pretty fresh." And she said, "I'm never going to forget that happened."
mm,
And so the problem isn't the remembering. The problem is the acting out the behavior like we're still 9. You
mm.
understand?
Yeah, exactly.
So I'll back up a little bit. So I think what you're really talking about is that I could share is the four doorways to conscious living. I like to say that at the end of the reading, people say, "This is great information, Indra. Now what do I do with it?" And So the four doorways, the first doorway is you have to learn to observe. You have to learn to watch your own thinking and behavior. You need to watch your reaction to other people's thinking and behavior. You need to
Mm,
get out of the movie of your life into the audience
mm.
to observe your own life objectively. And
Yeah.
we need to get out. A lot of people are stuck in childhood stories that they got harmed. Something happened to them when they were 7 or 9 or 11, and uh, they touched a hot stove, and then at 35 and 45 and 55, whenever stoves come around, they still feel I better not touch that stove. And the idea is to sort of let go of that. They're still sort of in their childhood by their experiences. And by observing them
Mm,
dispassionately, objectively, we're able to let go of those stories. The second doorway is to let go what doesn't serve us. We need to
yeah.
observe what doesn't. We need to observe our own behavior.
Yeah.
Then we need to let go whatever it is that isn't serving us. That doesn't mean that we let go of everything, but it does mean that whatever we can and are ready to let go, what we let go at 15, when we let go at 20, 25, we may not be able to let go until some things at 35, and then some things we can't let go until we're 55, and that's okay. But whatever we can let go, we let go. That's the second doorway. The third doorway is to love ourselves. And then the
Mm,
fourth doorway is to live in the moment. So if we're living in the
yeah.
moment, then we're loving ourselves. So how do we love ourselves? We let go and release what doesn't serve us. The
Mm,
more that we let go what isn't serving us, the more that we then love. We have more compassion, we have more understanding, we feel lighter, we have more joy in our life. How do we
mm,
know what to let go? We need to learn to observe.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
so that is whatever the modalities are, this is the practice that I recommend for people in order to be able to come to the present moment. The present moment means that we're not living in story, we're not living in compulsion, we're not living in obsession, we're not living from I burnt my finger on a stove and I never want to touch a stove again. And that's
Mm,
very simplistic, but it has to do with the emotional hurts we have, that we trusted and we got hurt. It has to do with our anger at being at not getting our way, and people having authority over us, and it has to do with the fear of touching into our feelings, and abandonment, and feeling alone and feeling rejected. And when we're a little child, we feel rejected. As an older adult, we learn that not everybody is for everybody, and that a relationship has come to an end, and that it may be personal, but the fact is that we weren't happy either
mm,
saying that a person leaves in a relationship. We weren't that happy either, and that 6 months, a year, 2 years later, we meet somebody and we say, "My God, I wish I'd have broken that other relationship sooner."
mm,
And so the way to, the idea is that as we get older, we realize that we don't have to hold on to things as much as we did when we were younger. And that is the four doorways help us with that. And the modalities are there to help us to see what it is we're holding on to.
Yes, as I see and I read about psychology, most of the psychologists also try to take out as from our conditioned stories, as I talked in the introduction of you. So, what do you think about this? Like conditioned stories of people is what make them be something else or someone else. Like, do you take them through a process, or you can tell us something that they will understand how to do it, or they need to really go through a process by you so they can understand better how to remove their conditioned stories or conditioned life, not the real life.
Well, now that's an interesting question because the with the wheel of totality, the seventh house, when you don't have a planet in the seventh house, you have trouble seeing through conditioning. And so the people who have difficulty, I mean, everybody has conditioned stories, but if you have a
Yeah,
planet in the seventh house, then you learn to, it's easier to let them go. But there are people who don't have a planet in the seventh house, and now this is based on the sidereal chart, Vedic astrology chart, may not be the same for a Western chart, but they have trouble seeing through conditioning. They're the
yeah,
one, they're the ones who when the father or mother says we need a lawyer in the family, they're the ones that become the lawyer.
yes.
And but they realize that, I mean, the ones that have a planet say, I don't want to be a lawyer. That's not their
Mm,
issue. The family says, I don't want to be I want you to be a lawyer, and they say, I don't want to be the issue. They just say, I don't want to be a lawyer. And they may take law school, and then they say, this isn't for me, and they drop out.
mm,
But the ones that maybe go into their 30s and 40s being a lawyer and
mm,
realizing that they hated it the whole time, they're the ones that have an empty seventh house, and they're more susceptible to conditioning, and they don't realize um, that they're responding to they think it's their story. They don't realize it's not their story.
mm,
So I tell this example is that I had a client who was going to be 80 years old the next day. This was
mm,
maybe 8 years ago. She was going to
mm,
be 80 years old the next day, and she was pretty awake. I went through all the modalities with her, and I was impressed that she was pretty hip and pretty awake. But then at the end, she said, um, and she didn't really know why she said this, but at the very end, as we're sort of parting, she said, it was at a fair. We had an hour reading at a fair. She said something like, I pray for forgiveness for my parents every night. And she said a statement of which I don't remember it, but I used the statement, a stitch in time saves nine.
mm,
Okay, which means it's a it's a it's a uh, it's a Puritan ethic kind of story. Stitch in
mm.
time saves nine. Waste not, want. Something like she said. And I said to her, that's not your story. So she's 80 years old. I figured her
Yeah,
parents are gone 20 or 30 years.
yeah,
Every night for 30 years or more, she's praying to live up to a story that isn't her
yeah,
story. It's her
yeah,
parents' story.
yes.
And I say to her, it's not your story. She doesn't have a planet in the seventh house. 80
Mm,
years old. She
yeah,
doesn't have a planet in the seventh house. I said to her, it's not your story. She says to
mm,
me, it's not my story. I say, it's not your story. It's your parents' story. It's not your
mm,
story.
mm,
She
mm.
says, it's not my story. I said, it's not your story, dear. She says, it's not my story. And I
Mm,
didn't ask her, but I
mm,
got the feeling that in
yeah,
that moment,
mm,
she could see and let it go
mm,
after praying every night for 30 years
yeah,
to be able to live up to that story, that it's not her story, and she was able to let it go.
yeah. Can we say it is like unconscious living? Because I see a lot of my friends and people are having their conditioned stories exactly like this. Is it unconscious living, or what is the problem
Well,
with
it's
the
it's all it's
contemplative?
all unconscious living. It's not any more
Mm,
unconscious than anything else. But what it is thinking that, like the story about the stove and being a 7-year-old and telling don't touch hot stories.
mm,
You're right. It's unconscious living. The
yeah,
difference with this is that it isn't her story. The
yeah,
stove happen to you, and you're
Yeah.
unconsciously still living like you're a 7-year-old.
Mm.
This is not her story. This is
Exactly.
somebody else's story. It's like you look like you're in pretty good shape. I can't see your stomach, but let's say you look like you're in pretty good shape and you can eat whatever you want.
Yeah.
But your partner or your friend is one of those people that they eat fast foods one time and their stomach doesn't digest it and they have a real problem. And so all
Yeah.
of a sudden your friend can't eat fast foods,
Yeah.
you decide you can't eat fast foods, which maybe is good reasoning because
Mm.
it's maybe more healthy for you, but you're doing it because you want to have a better body. That's okay. But if you're doing it because your friend reacts to the food, that isn't very conscious. And that's what this is people living a story that isn't theirs. I mean, if you live your story that's yours, that's at least closer to conscious living. You got it. It's a step closer, you know.
Mm.
But when you're living a story that isn't even yours,
Mm.
that is even more unconscious. Is it better? I don't want to say better, but it is better to be living your own story than living stories that
Mm.
aren't even yours. Your story
Mm.
is that you live stories that aren't your story. And
Mm.
and that is another level of unconscious that you identify with other people's stories, even though you're not your story. And so you've got a couple of another layer on there that you have to heal.
Wonderful. And one other question that I always have, what is the connection between astrology and spirituality or spiritual journey, we can say? Like, is there any deeper connection?
Astrology is like the guru. The guru points the path. The guru doesn't point to themselves, not the good guru. The guru points to the path. They lighten up the path for you. So astrology is just merely a teacher that points the path for us. It's very color coded to our own story. It's not generic. The teacher the guru's teachings are mostly generic. I mean, they may occasionally give us a personal tip, but they're talking in generalities. We read a book, we may feel it talks to us individually, but it's not, and it may be written for us, with people like us in mind, but it's not specific. But an astrology chart, an astrology lecture is general, but an astrology chart is color coded to our own story. It is full on us, and so it's a map to help us to unlock our own strengths and weaknesses, our own particular karma in this particular life, and the story of our life. It's like an autobiography, or not an autobiography. It's like a biography. It's not an
Yes.
autobiography because we don't write it, but it's like a biography of our life, and telling us our strengths and weaknesses, and what areas of life are important for us and what areas aren't. So that's the value of astrology, and like anything, it could be misused. We can be held in a place. We can have teachers or astrologers that don't really understand it. They understand rules, and so they apply the rules. And we hear stories. Maybe you don't, but I hear stories often about. Uh, I had a client this week who had 7 planets in one house. Very unusual chart, and had a reading. I think it was here in India, and the whole reading was past lives. And
Mm.
here she is with like a 1 in a million, I don't know, million, but maybe 1 in a million chart, 7 planets in one house, and all he tells her about is past lives. I don't think that's really very relevant. I think that she's coming wanting to know, what does this mean? And so And maybe the past lives were important, but I don't know that it was relevant to her. I think she felt what I was giving her was much more relevant. It's not about me. It's an approach, and so like anything, you can you get a medical opinion and you go and get a second opinion, and so people will read X-rays differently. People will read medical conditions differently. Uh, people will say, somebody says, the doctor will say, well, you need to deal with this. And another person will say, it's not that important. They may take into account your age or the way you live or that it's sort of a isolated incident. Some people may think like a symptom for cancer, and other people will say, yeah, but not everybody that has that symptom gets cancer. So it's like astrology, like anything, is can be interpreted so many different ways, and so there needs to be maturity in the people you go to, and there needs to be maturity in the client, to understand and uh, not take what people say so wholeheartedly.
Hmm. As I went through the history of astrology, I saw that the kings or 1,000 years back, people were using to understand themselves and understand the situation. So that was a question that why it has a connection with spirituality. At the same way that you said a few minutes ago that the wheel of totality is gifted to you by spirit. Like, it is very interesting, like how as much information you can give us on that, how it has been given to you. Like, for example, the Faraday, the electronic scientist, those formulas were given to him by something beyond the conscious mind. And at night he was writing and writing two notebooks, and in the morning when he woke up, he saw that all the formulas are working. So that's what I'm telling. Like, how was the process in here? Like, you got this will of totality by
The
spirit.
process for me is opening and surrender. The process
Mm,
is rather than sitting there with I know and I deserve, is sitting
mm,
with I don't know anything and I don't deserve. I mean, it's not that I don't deserve, but it's that I don't deserve any more than anybody else. And
exactly.
and that it's to me it's open, it's being open and and surrendered. And
Yeah.
it comes with, you got to let go of the arrogance that I know and I deserve. And when you do that, then you close the third eye, you block the intuition. When you sit with openness and surrender and not wanting anything, then it comes.
Exactly.
And you mentioned the history of astrology, so you want me to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, exactly. Like, because we
So
have to know.
the history of astrology, it started with the in the 5,000 years ago with the that the king gods of Mesopotamia, that they wanted to have information, but they realized that if because they were infallible, they put themselves up as king gods and they were infallible, and that if they made a wrong decision, if the war wasn't a good idea, or if they planted at the wrong time, uh, they realized that that wasn't really good for their image. And so
Mm,
they came up with this idea of having counselors, and that the counselors they'd say, well, counselor, what should I do? And the counselor, who loved the position of sitting there with the king and eating all the good food and having the good life, they said, well, great, king, so you should plant now or you should go to war there.
mm,
But when they made mistakes, the king said, new counselor time, and
mm,
they were killed. And so counselors figured out over a period of time that the better way was for them to use outside influences. So they started looking towards birds, and they started human sacrifice. For 1,000 years, they used sacrifices of animals and humans, and they looked to open them up, and they saw which direction was the liver pointing or whatever the organ was. And if it was pointing east, then they went to war east, and if they were pointing west, they went to war west. And then the counselor could say, the king would say, well, it was wrong. And the counselor could say, wasn't me, the birds flew. So they got it out of their own hands. And so this went on for a long time. This became omens, omenology. And so omenology became the thing. Now, the Greeks around the turn of the century became more scientific, and this stuff was grounded, and they started making up the rules. Ptolemy and Aristotle and Plato, they all got these rules together, and some of those rules were really good, but they got this idea. The big question was, does the Earth circle the sun, or does the Earth circle the sun, or does the sun circle the Earth?
Mhm.
And the thing was that they got it wrong. Most of them got it wrong. They thought that the Earth was the center of the world, and you could understand 2,000 years ago thinking that. I mean, we think we're the center of the world, so I mean, it's understandable how we could think that the Earth is the center of the universe. And they tried to make a scientific proof of showing how mathematically, based on the orbiting of the moon and the sun and all of the systems, people would say, well, but look, da 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 da, and they came up with this thing with 57 different epicenters, whatever that is, to try to figure out a proof to say, yes, we're the center of the world. And up until the 1500s, you could be killed for the idea that if you said that no, the Earth circles the sun.
Yes.
And Galileo was the first one who was willing to cop to it and wasn't killed.
Yes.
I
Exactly.
forget who it was 100 years before that wrote the book. I can't think of his name right at the moment, but he got it from the Arabs, and he wrote a book saying that the Earth circled the sun, knowing that he would be killed for it. And the book wasn't published until he was on his deathbed. I can't think of his name. He's a famous scientist, but I can't think of his name at the moment. And then Galileo 100 years later was willing to cop to this, and they only imprisoned him. They didn't kill him. And then it became the reality became that yes, the Earth circles the sun, and then the rules were more the rules were made, and then the new astrology came. Actually, astrology was Madame Blavatsky went to India in the 1840s, who started the Theosophical Society. This is how the spirituality came together with astrology. And the esoteric side of astrology was it was a revival of astrology. And many of the rules were codified. And of course, Alan Leo, who was part of the Theosophical, they started writing, and it became more and more mundane. The newspapers started picking it up because people wanted their horoscopes, and the newspapers wanted a column. So they had an astrologer, and they made the daily column, and it became very popular. So it became popularized, and of course, then it became watered down, and what we might call sun sign astrology. That's very shallow and very rule oriented. And if you're a Leo, then this is a good day for you to make a business deal, and da 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 da. And it became very generic in a way to reach the mass media. But the spiritual astrologers, Dane Rudger and Mark Edmund Jones in the 30s, wrote incredible books that we started reading in the 70s. And really interesting to me that I have now met, at least online, many of the people who picked up astrology at the same time I did at this revival in the late 60s. The Age of Aquarius was a song by the Fifth Dimension. was a popular song, which you may have never heard of. Maybe people have never heard of it, but it was a really popular song. And the whole revival of astrology there were some great astrologers in the 30s and 40s, and there was a Western astrologer who tried to get a sidereal astrology going, the sidereal astrology of the Indian astrologers, and the Indian astrologers started coming to America in the 80s, and popularized the Vedic and Western and Indian astrology here, and now so many new forms of astrology, evolutionary astrology and modern astrology and Hellenistic astrology, which going back to the 2,000-year-old astrology. I mean, the paths are infinite now, and they all have truth. I don't know that they're all totally true, but they all have truth in them. And astrology is really interesting. I mean, you can say this about maybe anything, like you've got art behind you, that horse, like there's a lot of different schools of art, and you can't say, it's easy in art to say, well, no, it's not right or wrong, it's whether you like it or not. In medicine and health, you can have a lot of different opinions, and certainly between what you call Western medicine and big pharma and Eastern traditions and herbs and chiropractors and Ayurveda. There's many different ways, and you can't really say that's one better than the other. I mean, people will say that, but I mean, some things may work. For some people, Western works better than herbs and massage, and for other people, the massage and the healing modality, the other kinds of healing modalities, the new healing modalities that are 3,000 years old, um, are better. And so with the astrology, I like to say the Western don't agree with the Western, and the Vedic don't agree with the Vedic. And so if the Western and Vedic don't agree, who cares? It's just part of astrology that the newcomers in the Facebook groups say, well, what's the best thing that I should study? And the answer is that there isn't an answer, because everybody's got a different opinion. The best thing is to read everybody and figure it out for yourself. And so that's what I came to, is that I basically rejected, I studied it all over 50 years, and I practiced some things, but it never really clicked in. It never really was. I was more regurgitating than I was um, expressing from my heart. I was expressing from my heart that I liked it, but I wasn't expressing from my heart. I was expressing from my mind what I had learned. And then somewhere in the last 15 to 25 years, 10 to 25 years, it just appeared that at one time my teacher said to me, I said something to my teacher, and he said, where'd you get that? And I said, I think you told me. He said, no. I said, I read it in a book. And he was very intuitive. He said, I don't think so. You made it up. I made it up, and I just felt it to be right. Now, whether it was right for me, I think it's right for everybody, but it isn't. I can't tell you how I got it. Have you ever had that experience that you start talking about something and you go, where did you get that? I don't know. It's just something that have you had that experience?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like I heard it is the, as the great scientist Einstein and Nikola Tesla says, is the alignment of the frequency and energy. As I heard, it was like I was believing like this.
So I mean, you get so whatever, like you're an artist, and you water your paints even more than they tell you, and you do that, like the collage and paint. That's really, how they have paintings that are really thick. Well, where'd that come from? Well, somebody made it up. They took two different ideas and they made it up. And so did they get it in a class? Well, a lot of people did, but not the first one. The first one just made it up, and so I'm not saying that made it up. I'm just saying that they were just open, that when I say made it up, I said it wasn't that I consciously said I'm going to reject everything and I'm just gonna tell people things, I just started talking, and things came out that made sense to me. And when I share them with people, nobody says they aren't true for them. I have many different things that I do with astrology that nobody has ever heard of. Seventh house, empty seventh house being seeing through conditioning. Nobody's ever heard of that. But having trouble seeing through conditioning. But with every client I've ever worked with, which is maybe, between 500 and 1,000 just on that modality, nobody's ever said, oh, no, I don't have an empty seventh house, but I don't have any trouble with conditioning. Occasionally people will say, well, I don't understand. People will say, well, no, I don't think that's true. And then I explain it more and they say, oh, yeah, now I see. But everyone has said, I say you have an empty seventh house. They say, yes, I have trouble with conditioning. So, I mean, I have to say that it seems to be true. Where did I get it? I don't know. It just appeared. It just appeared. And I'm really happy with that. I mean, I'm not unhappy if I didn't have that, but I'm happy because I'm fulfilling my own destiny, as it were. That's not really the way I normally talk, but I'm fulfilling my own purpose. I don't really talk that way either. What I'm doing is just following my heart. That's the way I say it.
Exactly. And I think we have to do another episode on spirituality. As I see, you have a lot of wonderful information to give to the people. So for now, I think thank you so much, Indra, for answering a lot of questions today. Can you please tell us how people can find and how to access your work?
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, what I'd like to do is I have two free offers that I offer on the podcast. And so that is I can send you your Vedic astrology chart,
Thank you so
sidereal
much.
chart. I don't give you, it's not a reading. I may make a couple of comments. I'll help you to learn. I will give you a cheat sheet so you can understand it a little bit more, how the chart itself, but not
Mm,
the not not a reading of the chart, but how to make sense of the format of the chart. So you need to email me and give me birth, date, time, and place.
mhm.
And the second offer is I will send you a free test on how to figure out your Enneagram point. And it's a 5 or 10 minute test. You answer some questions based on a paragraph. It's very simple. Well, the test is simple. Sometimes the answers aren't so simple. For some people it's easy, and for some people it's not easy. But I will send you that test. So just email me. My email is indrarinzler. It's my name altogether at gmail.com. My website is indrarinzler.com. And it has information on the modalities. It has information on my services. It has information about me. And I can say, I think this may be the first podcast I can say, because I haven't done so many lately because of the holidays and everything and being in India, that you will then come into my new website, which I did in December. So a new website, which now gives me more ability to, I've upgraded the website and have more information on it. So, and we'll continue to add things. So if anybody's interested in that, that's the way to find me. The email me. The appointments are through email. The questions, if you have any questions out there, you can email me and I'll give you an answer. I respond pretty quick, as long as I'm not asleep. And happy to share with anybody. And thanks for having me. And thanks for the people out there listening. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us today on GNR podcast. It was truly enlightening to have Indra Renzler share their expertise and insight with us. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe and leave your comments below. Stay tuned for more engaging conversation. Until then, have a great time. Bye bye.